Okay, good evening everybody. Welcome to this evening's Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting held here in Bexhill Town Hall on the 9th of September, just after 6:30. So welcome all. First item on the agenda, do I have your, can you authorise me? It's been a while. August has been very quiet. Can I have your authorisation to sign the minutes of a meeting held on the 8th of July as a correct record of those proceedings?
So move.
Thank you. Apologies and substitutions. I don't believe we have any apologies, no substitutions, but we do have two members join us online. That is Councillor Maynard and Councillor McGurk from Ireland. Didn't specify Southern Ireland or Northern Ireland, but we just say Ireland. So that's that. Additional agenda items, there are none. Disclosure of interest and dispensations. Anybody? Councillor Timpey?
Trustee at the Delaware Pavilion.
Yeah. Councillor Thomas?
As a member of Delaware Pavilion and also chair of the housing company.
Okay. Anyone else? No? Oh, Councillor Maynard?
Thanks, Chairman. I think that just to be safe, I'll make a standing declaration as an executive member of East Sussex County Council, just in case anything pops up on the agenda that relates to East Sussex County Council in terms of any specific agenda item. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Is that it? Yep. Item 5, Delaware Pavilion Trust Performance Update, pages 3 to 106. So, what have we got here? Purpose of report, to invite the Chief Executive Officer of the Delaware Pavilion Trust to provide the Council with a performance update, and the recommendation is resolved that the performance report of the Chief Executive Officer of the Delaware Pavilion Trust be noted. This is sort of under Joe's jurisdiction now, and Stuart Drew is here, as is Sally Ann Lysett. So, Stuart, over to you. Or unless Joe wants to start.
I can, just for the context. There is a covering report which members will have had a foresight of. Just to remind you that the purpose of this evening is to hear from, as the Chairman explained, on the Delaware's performance, some of the key challenges and opportunities that it's facing. Appendix B, for reference, gives you a potted history. I thought as new to this committee, it might be helpful to see the context of the Delaware, potted history of the Delaware and its relationship to the Council in particular, which members might find interesting, along with a full version of the report, or Appendix A and Appendix C, the accounts for the Delaware. But I won't take or speak across Stuart's presentation itself, so I'll hand over to you now and share the presentation on the screen as well. If there are questions, I think we're taking those at the end of Stuart's presentation, Louise, is that right?
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me, and it's really lovely to be here at Overview and Scrutiny as well. As you know, I normally report to Council, but it's good to come to see you too and to answer any questions that you've got. As you know, obviously there is a number of stakeholders with the pavilion, so we produce very comprehensive reports of our activities that cuts across stakeholders and funders. So I'm really happy to take any detailed questions from the report, which I hope you've had an opportunity to read through. I think it's also useful just to whiz through a little bit of a presentation, just to give you a bit of a narrative and to bring across some highlights as well. So I think, Joe, are you ready to go with that? Yeah. I'm Stuart Drew. I'm Director and Chief Executive of the Pavilion, and I've been Chief Exec since around about 2012, around about the Olympics. I think it's really important to state, as many of you know, we're working on quite a large capital project for the pavilion. It isn't my purpose to go into any details with the capital project today. This is more about day-to-day activity, but obviously the two are reasonably interlinked. And as part of the work that we have been doing, I think it's really important just to remember the significance of the building of which we are all custodians, and indeed the links of the pavilion to people like Frank Lloyd Wright and Mies van der Rohe, that is really significant internationally and nationally, as well as we know, being at the heart of our communities. It's also worth saying and reiterating that the pavilion is, of course, the mother, if you like, of the South Bank Centre and the Barbican Centre and Chichester Festival Theatre and all those rather wonderful, resplendent, modernist buildings that gives us the modern arts centre. And that's not only about how culture and the arts are presented, but also the blueprint for how audiences and communities engage with those organisations as well. So it's really important just for us to be aware of that, of how significant the building is in terms of the culture in the UK. Let me just run this side by side so I can read my slides. We've always, really for me, since I took over in 2012, had a big focus on the community, both in terms of Bexhill, the wider Rother region, and of course the wider South East region as well. I think definitely since the pandemic, our interest in our community, in creativity, skills, the challenges that are faced by the community around us have become even more important. And I think there's a twofold thing happen. A, that we've really pushed really hard to engage with the educational sector and young people and wider communities from our side, but also there's that thirst from the community itself to engage with us now as well. I won't run through all these numbers, but the headline numbers are now that we're now engaging with around 11,000 people, young people and old people from our communities with our learning programs. This is almost double pre-pandemic of the number of we're engaging with. And that is a significant amount of work that's going on a daily basis with the pavilion. Skills 2, I don't think the slides are, it takes a moment. Skills 2 has become really, really important. In fact, in March 2020, as we went into the pandemic, we managed to secure some funding from Arts Council to help develop a skills programme with the local colleges and with County Council and Skills East Sussex. We didn't actually start delivering those until 2022 because of the pandemic. But we're really pleased that that programme's now being led by Kim Byford, who was previously at Bexhill College, who is amazing and has really pushed this programme forward. So really looking at getting young people from education into creative careers. If we go on to the next slide. This has added another 4,000 people to our output. Really looking at work placements. When Kim started with us, we really asked how many work placements, how many apprenticeships were going on within the region, and it was hardly any at all. And we made a pact that we would try and double nothing to 2, and then to 4, and then to 10, and to slowly build that up, because we could see that lots of other organisations weren't really making any headway there, and to really take a very focused approach. So building on the jobs fair, which had record numbers in the financial year we're reporting, again, we've really seen that grow, and we're now delivering our own apprenticeships right across the region for things like creative technician roles that's led by the staff within the Delaware Pavilion. So this is a real emerging thing for us, and I will come back to this as we go forward. I won't linger too much, I've already said this, but just to say, I think again, pre-pandemic, we were really struggling to engage with schools. I think obviously we all know there was a real focus on maths and English, and that the creative subjects were being squeezed. But we know how important those are in terms of well-being and skills development and all those kinds of things. So again, we're seeing really, really brilliant schools engagement and higher education engagement, and you can see those lists in the report of those schools engaging. It's also really, really important to track the development of Create Music, which is the music service, which again we took over in the pandemic. I've run that together with Brighton Dome and Brighton Festival, so we have some really good bookends at each end of the region, the Dome at one end and us at the other. Again, you can see there's another 5,500 pupils engaging with music programmes, but again, supporting that sector. And indeed, we've just been asked by the DFE and Arts Council to push that into West Sussex now as well. So we're just about to make that a Sussex-wide provision. And this carries really good access to schools for us and to the wider skills agenda. So this is a really exciting development for us all. I'm not going to talk too much about the core programme. I think most of you are pretty familiar with this programme. I think what I would say is with a big focus on the district and the communities within the district, it's also, we know, really important to encourage visitors in. And I've been looking with interest at your plan that you're looking at later in the meeting too, and a real focus on bringing visitors and tourists into the region. So these international programme of exhibitions that are promoted widely, it's really brilliant that that programme is delivered by somebody who comes from Bexhill and was taught at Bexhill College and went away to the Serpentine Galleries and has come back to us. So this is a Bexhill born and bred programme, which is really exciting. We've also got people like Catherine Wood, who is Director of Programmes at Tate, who is also from Couden. So we can see that there's some really, really exciting skills development over the last 2 decades of work, which is really coming to fruition. Of course, again, the LIVE programme, I need a bit of technical, I need one of our technicians, we've got a bit of feedback, talking about the LIVE programme. But the LIVE programme, again, has gone from strength to strength. We've seen a real surge with the LIVE programme off the back of the pandemic. It's actually starting to settle a little bit now, which is really good for us all because it creates more space to have a more varied programme and for there to be more room with community groups and other hirers. But it's been incredibly successful and allows us to work with a range of partners, including local promoters. Bexfest is run by a local female promoter, Rye Jazz, for example. So a whole host of supporting that local ecology with that programme. I know, in fact, I was recently with Lorna at a presentation of the successes of Turner Prize, and Turner, the Towner Gallery in Eastbourne are actually a very close partner of ours. We work very closely with them, and in fact, it was really brilliant to be able to deliver some music and deliver a lot of their young people and skills programmes under contract for them. So they actually paid us to deliver some of those programmes through the Talent Accelerator programme. I thought it was worth just doing a little bit of comparison. This isn't a competition, but the results that are coming out of Turner Prize are really impressive. But I would say that we do those on an annual basis and we over-deliver on those results coming out of Eastbourne on an annual basis. More events, more audiences, etc., more satisfaction. So it's just really interesting just to compare and again to see how we've all worked together to get the most out of the Turner Prize in Eastbourne. I think is really encouraging. Now I just wanted to touch a little bit on the equilibrium of RODA funding and Arts Council funding. It's probably a bit of an elephant in the room, so it's probably a really good thing to talk about. It's worth saying that I'm actually presenting to last year's funding, so this is the report for last year rather than the current year. Actually, the community grants were reduced from that figure for the current year and for the next 3 years going forward. So that 550 figure is actually slightly less. It's worth saying that with that community grant, we continue to offer community concessions to those key partners that we work with on an annual basis. So the pavilion's chosen to continue that activity because they're so key to what we do and so key to the community. It's really important that this equilibrium is really carefully considered. It was put together as a concept from the early 2000s when the Arts Council invested capital money in the building, and is looked at by all funders. And as we go forward looking at other funding coming into the region, it's one of the first things all those funders look at to see whether there's confidence from the local authority, where there's match funding from the local authority, and really importantly, where there's strategy from the local authority as well. And we will see that there's areas around us, mentioning no names, but where that funding has dropped and where the strategy has dropped as well, and where funders like Arts Council lose confidence and not only won't invest in the bigger players, but actually won't invest in the smaller players too. So this is a really careful equilibrium here, which has always worked incredibly well. And I must say it's also always been shown by Rother as really strong leadership. It's really regarded within our sector that it's really strong leadership. Let's go on, Joe. So I don't know how well you can see this slide. I probably should have made it a bit clearer given the screens, but let's just run through this. So this is additional income that's been unlocked as a result of that funding in the last 18 months. So I mentioned earlier about the extension of the skills funding. As an exemplar model of the Talent Accelerator programme, we've actually managed to release nearly £1 million worth of funding from Arts Council to continue that skills work. Now, it's actually spread across Sussex, but it does have money ring-fenced, particularly for Bexhill Sidley, and for that to have an impact on the wider region. So that's really significant. And again, it joins us up to that wider region with what's going on. The second one along the blue one is Heritage Lottery funding, is a grant of just over £200,000, working to unlock £8 million for the capital project. So that will be match funding for the Levelling Up Fund. But is there, and again, I've got a very brief slide to talk about what that does, but it's very key in terms of business planning for us. The next one is general fundraising. On an annual basis, we'll typically raise around £300,000 towards that. The next one is Creative Sidley, from a private trust, £200,000 towards young people's programmes in Sidley run by the Pavilion. The next one is £400,000 towards AV and PA systems for the auditorium that was delivered within this funding period. And the last yellow one is commercial income, which is £300,000. So there's a total of about £2.3 million. This isn't budget relieving. Not all of it's budget relieving. It's project-based costs, but it's investment within Bexhill and the wider Rother region that's really important. And then I would like to say that we've worked really hard with Rother in terms of releasing that what was called Levelling Up funding. I'm sure it's soon to get a new name, but it's up to £60 million worth of funding into the district that we've worked really hard with Rother District Council in terms of making the case. And also just to highlight that the Beeching Road Studios money of £1 million from Local Growth Fund was also brokered by Delaware Pavilion and Rother, working really hard together. So there's been some huge successes, and I think that really begs the question, how do we work together for the best of the district, and how do we make the most of what we've got? We've got some fairly significant funding coming in, even if you just look at the pavilion. So how do we maximise that for the wider district? So the capital projects, of course, you will know these are just the headlines: conservation reset, community learning and skills, environmental impacts, trying to look at our energy costs, and the business viability to try and increase the business viability. And then, as I said, the Heritage Lottery funding is predominantly looking at the wider impacts of business planning for the pavilion as well, and how to try and maximise business viability for us going forward through the capital projects. I won't repeat these back to you in any detail, and again they cross over really nicely with your plan, of course, but also looking to tackle socio-economic challenges within the region, creating and safeguarding jobs, improving health and well-being, and of course dealing with that heritage under threat that desperately needs some investment into it. And of course I would describe that we always do jazz hands. We're in the entertainment business at the pavilion, but actually behind the scenes, both the state of the building and the continued underinvestment over lots of decades, and also operationally, the fact that there isn't a ground floor bar. We spend all day setting up the bar, run the bar, spend the next day packing the bar away again. All those kind of operational issues that you will be aware of need to be sorted, because actually we can be making a lot more money from these operations and being a lot slicker. Again, I won't go into any detail. I've talked very briefly about tourism, but just how completely important that is, and how privileged I've been to be working with 1066 Country for almost a decade. I know we've been through some challenging times recently, and I'm sure there's still some challenging times ahead for 1066 and the wider tourism offer, but this is really important to us and the wider region. Just to look at visitor numbers, it's actually our ambition to build to over 600,000 visitors for the pavilion, which pre-pandemic I thought was incredibly easy to do. I thought we could really hit 650,000 visits. I still believe that we can have a pretty good go at reaching that target. But as you can see from the graph, the visitor numbers still haven't quite recovered pre-pandemic. And we're seeing that nationally. Take St Ives, for instance, which is regarded as a kind of flagship in this area, has dropped from 250,000 visits a year to just about 180,000 visits a year. That's a ticketed venue. But also V&A Dundee, which is obviously a national institution operating in Scotland, is around the same visitor numbers as us. It's just slightly more visitor numbers. So it's really important to get that context, and also to know that our daughter, the South Bank Centre, is still operating at about 73% of capacity from pre-pandemic. So we've still got some rebuilding to do. I think it's really important to know that we're all still rebuilding post-pandemic, and there's still work to do. I'm a little bit conscious of time. How are we doing for time? Am I okay to just keep going a moment? Yeah? Okay. I think these are really important. I've looked at a little bit of a SWOT analysis for us, and I think it's really important just to look at some of those things. It's important to look at the strengths. We've got a really strong board, really strong key personnel. We've got a really vibrant and proven business model. There is still, as we've heard, more efficiencies to be made in that business model, but nonetheless it's very strong. We've also got things like all our own data. So as a live venue, you're not going through Ticketmaster with dynamic ticket pricing for Oasis. You're actually coming largely through to the Delaware Pavilion team. And not only is that good for us, because it means that we're holding the turnover and the ticket revenue, but also we're holding the data. And we've actually just submitted a big funding application today to help us really maximise our data. I think there's about 112,000 records on the box office system and the mailing list system. So to really look to see how we're going to maximise that and use that to our best advantage. So there's some real strengths in there, including our partnership. Of course, the weaknesses are general inflation, pay inflation, high operational costs, low reserves, and the fabric of the building that I'm sure we're all dealing with on a day-by-day basis. Energy is still really interesting. Pre-pandemic was around about £75,000 a year. I think we were on an incredibly good rate in terms of utilities. Post-pandemic, that's pretty much close to £375,000 a year. It's big. We are just entering, we've been through the first phase of entering an energy framework. We're in the second phase in October of going on to the next range of that framework. So we will see those costs come down. They are starting to come down, but nonetheless they are quite significant and quite a significant chunk of revenue costs. And also just to reiterate that we're looking at environmental efficiencies, solar panels, so all those things are embedded in the capital projects, providing we can afford them as part of that project. Sorry, Joe, let's carry on. That's all right. That's all right, keep me moving. And then also just to say, minimum wage, big fan of minimum wage. We know that average earnings in Rother are a real priority for us all to get those earnings up. But we all know that that's also really difficult. They've gone up 10% a year, pretty much year on year. Our pay structure is quite compact. So if you affect the bottom, you also affect the middle and towards the top as well. And with revenue grants at standstill pretty much for a decade, both from Arts Council and Rother, it's really challenging. So between utilities and this, it's quite a challenging moment in time. Let's carry on, Joe. And again, I think I showed a similar slide to Council last year, but of course that price of a cup of coffee, that price of hiring the venue, all those things will go up, will continue to go up. And that's one of the reasons why we've chosen out of our own funds to continue the community grant or a version of the community grant to regular hirers, so we can try and bulletproof that a little bit. But nonetheless, all those things will continue to go up. And then we're nearly there, just opportunities and threats. I think we're in a really sweet moment with a capital project, and we're on our way to securing well in excess of £23-24 million worth of capital investment, actually with targets higher than that to reach. So this is a really brilliant moment to get that investment we need and sort out some of these challenges that we've got. But we all must work really closely together in order to maximise that, not only for Rotherham, for Delaware Pavilion, but also for the community and those wider impacts in terms of High Street, wider district regeneration, all those kinds of things. There's a big opportunity here, and although it's quite challenging now, once we start to come out the other side, the pavilion will be incredibly high profile as we come back out the other side. In terms of threats, as I've mentioned, the building defects and reputations as we get closer to the project become more and more challenging. As we run through more and more surveys through the pavilion, it's highlighting some of the challenges of the pavilion, and I think that will be a real challenge to us. We know that there's changes with government. We know that there's changes with government policy, and particularly affecting local authorities and things. So that wider sensibility about what's going on is really important. And the potential immediate fragility of the pavilion, but also of Bexhill businesses as well. and really thinking about Bexhill businesses as we go through capital refurbishment and either a phase closure or a period of closure of the whole site, potentially as we go forward. How are we going to work together in order to safeguard those businesses that rely on us? So it's really, really interesting, and also to protect this huge amount of investment that's coming in, not only with Levelling Up, we are working incredibly well together. It's really good to be working with Lorna and with Duncan Ellis, who's been amazing in pushing the project forward. But we've got quite a delicate relationship with Heritage Lottery. We still haven't secured the full 8 million. We're on the process to securing 8 million with Heritage Lottery, so we can't mess that up. And they're looking at those wider partnerships to look for that security. And just assuming there's no more pandemics and that the wars contain themselves, as well in terms of that wider context of risk registers as we go forward as well, because that's made us all quite delicate as we are. Joe, I think my final slide, you'll be pleased to know. Just to finish with Sidley really, but Sidley as a sign for the whole community right across the district. This is a transformational way for the pavilion to run, to be running, to help support and secure funding with other partners, brokered by Rother, which I think is really important and really designates a way that actually we can use your investment in the pavilion and the strategy with the pavilion over a long period of time to actually draw money and release funds for the wider region. So this is an incredibly joyous relationship, and it's really great to see Sidley get their planning permission and hopefully start to put a spade in the ground. Will be really important for us all. So thank you. Really, really happy to take any questions, etc. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Stuart. All very interesting. And one thing I will say, I'm coming in a couple of weeks' time to the James Bond Orchestra. Whether I wear a DJ or not is another thing, but I am coming anyway. I think you've sort of touched on a few things there, and when I first joined this council back in 1999, the council funded the Dillawar to just over £1 million a year, and as you said, starting from the early 2000s, the funding was reduced in half down to just over 500,000. Where it sort of 23 years later sits at the same figure. So there would be argument to say that that is good value. Whether a lot of people around where I live would say that is another thing, being over in Eastern Rother and surrounding Rye. But equally, I sort of always explain, Rother put in one lump of money, Arts Council put in sort of pretty well matched funding. So my sort of concern has always been, if we as a council reduced our funding, obviously, as you mentioned, Arts Council are going to get the jitters, or they might not get the jitters. They say, well, we'll match it as well. So all of a sudden, if we was to knock 100 grand off, they would knock 100 grand off, you're £200,000 down. And as you said, it's cost you £1,000 a day to open the doors just with the heating costs and the electric and energy. So that's an awkward thing. Any thoughts on that, or you care not?
No, I care deeply. I think your summary is quite correct. I think for me, there's some slight frustrations because I think we've really pushed to move the business model on, as you say, over a period of time. And I think it's just unfortunate that we're fighting high costs in general. We're lucky still to be here. And again, that's working, very closely as a team between Rother and the Delaware Pavilion to make sure that the pavilion survived the pandemic and working with other partners so that we're still operating. But actually we're operating with really high costs coming out of that actually if we were commercially operating at that level, we would be able to put some money back in. I mean, I think the biggest question for me is whether you put whether you continue to invest the money in the building, and capital project or no capital project, you're still going to need a big chunk of money to put back into that building to keep it running. It is a big ocean liner on the seafront that is incredibly expensive to run. So I think there's all kinds of whys and wherefores there, really, with regard to that. The only thing that I would say is I would just draw your attention back, and I think the synergy between what the pavilion's tried to deliver, and I've really tried to steer it in this way, so that the pavilion is also delivering to wider agendas. And again, when you read your plan, in terms of visitor economy, in terms of well-being, in terms of wages, what I'd say to you is how can we work together to develop that, to really deliver on that agenda and be best value. And one would hope we've delivered, 65 million pounds worth of investment just in the last 18 months. So what can we do with that going forward? And we just need to make sure that it also, hits the core budget lines and keeps Andrew happy too, as well. But I think we need to think about that strategically. Just very briefly, if I may, I know there was a question from Rye, and we need to think about that wider district impact. And I would just reiterate that is always on our mind. And part of those strategic relationships, as I mentioned, I've spent almost 10 years chairing 1066 Country, where we've spent a lot of time in Rye, where we've worked very closely with Sarah Broadbent, who's been very brilliant as a board member in promoting that part of the region. I'm on regular calls with things like Rye Creative Centre. I spoke to them last week and helping with some of the challenges that they've got, and of course with Rye Jazz. And then you've got both our own learning programmes and Create Music seeking to work with the schools right across the region. It must be sad that it's not always reciprocated and there's not always the opportunity to work with some of those schools. But nonetheless, we are pushing forward with that and continually pushing forward with that. So I think in the same way that I just said to you, well, how do we continue to work together in order to get the most out of the Delaware Pavilion as a really significant asset for the region? In terms of working, say, with Beeching Road locally or Sidley Hub, what are those other things that we want to do working in partnership across the districts in order to get that wider benefit? I spent a long time working with Flimwell as well, right on the northern edge as well. So that work is going on. We just have to work, it has to be reciprocated, and we have to be strategic about it in order to have an impact.
Thank you. Right, the members, who we got first? Councillor Clark, you were first, I think.
Thank you, Chairman. I was looking at the income from donations, which is over £1 million a year. I know it's such a big report, you can't break it all down, but I'm quite interested to know how many people take out personal subscriptions to the Delaware and whether that figure increases each year or goes down. Because I'm just wondering if there's room for a bit more aggressive advertising, asking people to join the Delaware. I know I've got a family member to do, and and it's not a large amount of money to take out a subscription. But I just wonder if it should be targeting more. I don't know if we do it for my alerts, but a bit more aggressive, get more people to get involved in this wonderful asset across the district.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to say that £1 million is probably wider fundraising. It's not just that specific area. Actually, in recent time, we've actually grown those numbers of members and patrons from around 200 to about 12 or 1,300 off the top of my head. So those numbers have significantly grown. I think my comment about the management of the data is a really important one, and Sally, my colleague here, has been working really hard on that. I think what we need is capacity in order to sort out the database a bit. There's obviously lots of, obviously with the right permissions and the right GDPR for data, to look and see how we can maximise that in terms of effectively upselling off the back of ticket sales for membership and patronage.
Right.
There is, it's also worth saying, and I didn't go into too much detail, but as part of the Heritage Lottery work, there is also a fundraising consultant as part of that. And one of the things they've been looking at is individual giving, as well as part of our programmes. I think what they're finding, though, is what we already know, is the propensity for people to give in any large amounts of money actually is quite limited within the region because of the lack of business, because of the lack of big business and those kinds of things. But we'll see what comes out of that review. I don't want to preempt it.
And just come back on that. Yes, I think you've got a valid point because my daughter belongs, and when you've got a pop concert, the tickets could just go almost overnight. So you've got more chance of getting a ticket if you're a member than you are if you're not. So that's a good point to put out to people. When you get these popular bands and that, you know, they're gone, aren't they? In a day, you know, in tickets.
Thank you. Who's that? Councillor Cook.
Thank you. Thanks for the report, Stuart. Always a joy to hear about your successes. When I was chairman last year, I was honoured to be invited to the Create Music and the Big Sing concerts, which were phenomenal. And I do congratulate you on, you know, arranging that people go to the schools, teach the children, and then bring them in for the concert. I think we need to make sure that people know that it's the Delaware that is organising it. I don't think your name is out in the rural areas and at the schools enough. The children come home and say, I've been to Bexhill to sing. No, we want them to say, I've been to the Delaware, because that would mean the parents would think, oh, we need to go along there. That's worth going to see, which I think is wonderful. And I love the fact that you've involved so many school children, and it is very, very impressive. With your Create art as well, do you take that out to schools? Because I know one of the impinges on the schools' budgets at the moment, if they want to take a class to anywhere, you're talking nearly £500, you know, for the insurance and the coaches, and that's beyond the school's budget. So I just wondered if there was any, you know, market where Delaware Pavilion is on tour and going around the schools doing things for creativeness.
Thank you, and thanks for your kind comments. I think it's worth just considering that, and I really take your point on board about ownership of those programmes, and for people to have that brand recognition, both for us and for Rother too. I think it's worth saying that we can only achieve what we achieve by working in partnership. And it's worth recognising that both Create Music is its own organisation which delivers, although I chair it. And similarly, some of the other singing activity is delivered, for instance, by Bexhill Festival of Music. So what we want to do is to use the pavilion as an asset or as a catalyst for things to happen. But I have already had a conversation with regard to the Create Music One Voice Festival, which actually involves over 2,000 young people, to make sure that we're listed there alongside Glyndebourne actually as a partner for those to acknowledge the work that we put in. I think on the other thing it's worth saying with regard to the core programme, that aside from covering staff costs, the learning and participation budget is about £10,000. And I think it's really important to understand that. And we can only deliver what we're delivering either with partnerships or with fundraising. But the problem with that fundraising, or either the advantage or the problem with it, one way or the other, is that it's project-based. So in the same way that the capital funding through Levelling Up is restricted for capital and can't be used for anything else, it means that allows us to deliver programmes. So, for instance, the £200,000 for Sidley is earmarked to that. but doesn't actually help our core management costs or the core rising costs. So there's a bit of smoke and mirrors here, but I think we've tried to get ourselves into a position where we're working in partnership strongly enough that we're facilitating delivery and supporting delivery as much as possible, which I think is really key. But I take your point on board. It's a good point.
Could I just add? Yeah, there's a really interesting scheme sponsored by Hyundai, which is called the Great British School Trip, which has recently come on board. We're seen as a hero organisation, a hero venue, and they will sponsor those costs, those transport costs, to bring schools to the pavilion for whatever reason. It's just recently been announced. I've sent a newsletter to all the schools, but if that's something that people can pass on, that would be amazing, because that's exactly what we want to happen. And we know those are the costs, and we know we can't cover them. So, yeah, private sponsorship has covered that.
That's really, really good news, Sally. That really is. Could you send the details perhaps to Lorna, and then she can forward it to all the councillors, because I think that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Good. Who we got next? Councillor Byrne and then Councillor McGurk. So Councillor Byrne first.
Thank you, Chair. You were talking about establishing a brand, and I think you've done that very well. You're already very well established in education, very well established in music education, and of course arts almost go without saying. But when we have, not difficulty, when we get comments from members of the public saying, but what does it do for us? I was particularly impressed with two events. One was the jobs fair, the job and recruitment fair. Now, there were a lot of high-tech companies from Hastings there, as well as from the wider Rother area. And I think the fact that that fair was held at the De La Warr gave it a status it may not have had otherwise. So, and I just thought that was really good community engagement, business engagement. And when we're going to talk later tonight about our strategy of attracting business into the area and raising the average wage, I think events like that are very, very important. So, you know, congratulations on that one. It was well read, it was well staffed, it was well organised, it was also very crowded. So it was pretty good. The other one was the Healthy Rother event. And I think we shouldn't ignore the impact that because it's the De La Warr, people turned up. And the impact that must have had on various individuals taking out fitness programmes, improving their health, their diet, whatever. Again, community outreach, maybe in an area you wouldn't think of immediately when you think of an arts centre. So I think those two, and I'm sure there are more, but it's because you've established that brand, I think it works. And even if it's someone else hiring your venue, the fact that it's there elevates that particular event and elevates its or facilitates its sort of community involvement. So I think that's great, but I really think all of us, when we're justifying this grant to the De La Warr, and when we're being asked by our residents to justify it, we need to not just concentrate on education and music and arts. There's so much more, and yeah, it would absolutely be a tragedy to lose it, and it will be marvellous to have it grow and see it come out the other side of this wonderful programme you've got going on. And I hope you get all the grants you're hoping for. Thanks.
Let's go across the water to Councillor McGurk. Simon.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm actually in Malin Head, and looking out the window, I can report it's gale force 5 to 6, increasing westerly later. So we'll look forward to that. Yeah, my question was last year. I asked a question about how Rye and Winchelsea and Eastern Rother were benefiting from the funding that the De La Warr gets. I think it sounds like you've had sight of the question already. And no one is disputing the value of the De La Warr. It's a great regional asset, and we really benefit from it across Rother and across the wider region. And like Councillor Byrne was saying, really support, as much of the funding, well-deserved funding as we can get for Dillawar and the wider area. My query really is about the benefit that the whole of Rother sees from Dillawar, like Chair Councillor Osborne was mentioning earlier on, in our part of the world. There's limited reference in the report. I know you sort of mentioned before, I think there was a Zoom meeting a couple of weeks ago with some of the tenants from the Rye Creative Centre, and that's positive. It's great to see. We know that the Jazz and Blues Festival really benefits from the relationship with the Dillawar, and that brings a lot of high-profile acts into our region, which again is really welcome. But can we just have something specific that we should expect to see in next year's report that describes some of the benefits we want to see in Rye, Winchelsea, Eastern Rother, and what specifically in terms of engagement and outreach, community, the sort of value that we want to see in our communities. What can we specifically expect to see next year?
Thank you. As you say, I did get pre-sight of that question, which is why I've made a number of references to it already. I think, as we discussed last year, I think there's quite a lot that's going on. I know that in kind of reviewing with my colleagues, there is some frustrations in terms of things like reaching out to schools and not actually managing to make that happen for one reason or another. I guess the question is, I always like, as you can tell, I always like to work in partnership and always like to collaborate. So I think it would be useful to kind of, meet in the middle somewhere and kind of go, well, what can we achieve from the relationships that we've got? I mean, as I say, particularly with Sarah Broadbent, I spend a lot of time with Rye Creative Centre, with Ian Bowden. There's lots of contacts there, and I think I've personally made a big commitment to be in Rye, probably more so pre-pandemic than post-pandemic, largely because of the Hastings Borough Council challenges with 1066. But definitely pre-pandemic made a real point of being present and asking people that we're working with to be in present. So I think, again, as I said earlier, it's a bit like Sidley Hub or Beeching Road Studios or whatever. It's kind of like, well, what are these ideas? How can we develop them? If there's a real need for us to develop something more tangible, and can we try and raise some money to deliver them as well? But really keen on that area. We spent also a lot of time working with art in Romney Marsh, not so much recently, but in the past as well. So we're really open to making that happen. And I promise that we'll do a little Rye and Winchelsea section in the report next year as well, so you can see that detail as well as we go forward. I hope does that answer your question?
Well, I mean, yeah, it'd be nice to see something in the report, but it'd be nice if it actually reflected, what was happening, I guess, and something kind of proactive to support the art scene there. But I don't want to take up the whole evening, and I'm grateful for your thoughts on Rye Winchelsea. I just really honestly want to see something, some benefit from the Dillawar for our area, and the sort of the real sort of creative centre and all the sort of stuff that happens in Rye and Winchelsea that's done on a sort of voluntary basis and a trust basis. We've got the art gallery, we've got various different community groups who do so much, and just to see the Dillawar reaching out and really proactively supporting the scene there would give so much value locally.
Okay, thank you. That's noted.
And I suppose so. You could sort of argue that the fund that Sally Ann mentioned for going out into schools and colleges is almost incumbent upon us locally to remind them that that is potentially there, isn't it? So,
I mean, I think also to just make sure. I mean, obviously there's a lot going on with the capital projects, and I think we just need to be careful of capacity. But I would say to anybody, please reach out. You know, we are here, and I think the feedback, potentially the instant feedback from some of my team today, is that we've approached the schools and it's not necessarily been reciprocated, which happens a lot because they're under a lot of pressure too. So that isn't trying to blame anybody, but it's just trying to make things happen. And if you can encourage that from your side, then we can definitely try and reciprocate where we can. Thank you.
okay. Councillor Burton.
Well, it's time that Battle and the other parts of rural Rother flagged themselves up here. Certainly what Simon said was a bit what I was going to say in relation to the report. And even hearing what you're saying now, you're telling us you're doing loads more than it actually is in the report. But it was hard for me to find what is happening in the rural schools, which in the report you've done some really good graphics that spell it out to us, and I think that would be really helpful to have that a little bit clearer than me adding up where's rural, where isn't, and etc. Because at the very beginning you talk about, you know, who's come from more than 30 minutes away and less. You know, rural Rother is practically 30 minutes away if you're up the top. So I think it's really, it sounds like you're doing the work. We'd like you to do more, of course we would, but we've got ideas of how we can get round that, of you getting there rather than, because it seems when we're sitting here impossible that people don't know where the Bellewaer Pavilion is, what it does, what it offers, but I believe it does not feature in everybody's awareness, particularly in the rural communities. I hope my colleagues would agree with me there. You know, they don't know enough, don't know it. So we have to keep on going. Thank you.
I think that's a good point made, and let's pull some of those things out as we go forward so you can see what's going on. I think it's worth just saying that we just have to watch. One of the biggest challenges that we have at the pavilion is looking at audience segments and looking at who we're concentrating on. And for instance, you will see that there is a big focus on young people. There's a number of reasons because of that, because of funding availability, because of pressures of young people coming out of the back of COVID, all those kinds of arguments. But it does mean making choices, and we know that we are living in a district where there's higher than average ages as well, so that although we are delivering, and I'm not necessarily talking about age, but I'm saying you take choices and choices with demographics of audiences as well. And I think there's part of that in terms of making the viability of the organisation work. But we must also report back there is activity going on, and we do spend a lot of time throughout the region on various activities. So I think we obviously just need to articulate that. But I think we also need to articulate that sometimes there's choices to be made. As I say, younger people versus older people is one that we deal with a lot actually within the organisation, which is incredibly challenging because there's not enough money to do it all. Thank you.
Right. Councillor Mrs Barnes, I expect you're going to give the North Western District a mention, are you?
Not particularly, I just have a question. And that is, how many, do all your events, sorry, I've got to face this direction, haven't I, to ask you? How many of your events are under capacity? I mean, you've got I've looked at the online list of forthcoming attractions, and I have to say you're absolutely right. I mean, there's about 3/4 of them certainly would not appeal to me, but I would get very excited about the classical concerts, so that's fine. But how many of those concerts run with fewer numbers than you would have liked?
I think the question is how many would we like or do we forecast? So we know the capacity of the venue is 1,000 seated or 1,500 standing, but we may say that some events we would only expect to sell 400 tickets, for example. So for us, it's looking at the viability. We spend a lot of time looking at the viability of each event and knowing where they will break even and where we would make money, depending on the deal. The deal with every event is different, the financial deal. So there's a whole lot of things at play, but ultimately what you're looking at is a break-even situation and then hopefully to make money on top of that. But that could be a break-even at 400 tickets, or that could be a break-even at 900 tickets, and then you're aiming to sell 1,500 tickets on top. So it varies. I would say, just picking up on your point about classical as well, it's really brilliant to see the rise of classical again. Classical was on its knees 10 years ago, and we would see audiences of 80 people, and the orchestras were struggling with the repertoire and the makeup of the orchestras, etc., and it really wasn't working. And I think now we've kind of got the opposite problem, almost, where we've got too many classical events and they're starting to compete with each other again because they've started to be successful. So again, it's looking at the market forces and how that works. But it's good to see a variety of classical going through.
Can I just add that in terms of classical, we're coming across quite a lot of young people in classical music, and we're quite interested in that through Create Music, but also through a partnership with the London Mozart Players, who have working with a group of people down here to promote classical music and to find audiences for younger people for classical music. Quite a lot of our classical music programme is with Create Music or the Hastings Philharmonic or the Hastings Youth Orchestra, and that works well for us. And it means that we can increase our audiences that way by building a partnership. But it's definitely an ongoing conversation.
Can I know you had a contract almost with the Royal Philharmonic, didn't you? That they do they still do an annual concert? Yeah.
So it's worth saying we're very lucky with the RPO because that comes through Bexhill Festival of Music. Yeah. So rather than it costing us £30,000 to book the RPO, actually they come in as a venue hire because of local connections and because of the Festival of Music.
I know Councillor Burton is absolutely dying for me to ask, but would you consider putting something on my alerts just to make certain that everybody who would like to know what kind of concert you're going to be putting on, for example, classical, so that everybody in the rural area knows what's happening. I mean, we've got quite a lot of local music, but it's always very nice to go to a large venue to hear classical music. There's just something about it. Can I just ask you something else that I noticed from your report? Your current reserves have taken a heck of a dive, haven't they, from 400 and something to 72. I mean, I see you have a plan to rebuild your reserves. How, over 5 years, how are you going to do it?
Very good question. Try and make some surpluses, I think, is the answer to that question. It's quite an interesting scenario. There is some designation of funds in there, so there are some funds that are put to one side for specific purposes that are designated by the board. And actually there's quite a lot of cash balances. The cash balances are quite high. So the risks are managed by the board. There's a very active finance committee, including accountants that are managing that. Of course, we'd like to see those reserves increase. It's incredibly challenging, and we're at a near break-even to loss-making position because of the energy bills. So we're continuing to make efficiencies to do that and try and put the prices up as much as we can. As you've heard, it's that balance of trying to offset that, like anybody else's budget, I guess. But it is how would you describe it? It is delicate. It's a delicate balance.
But at least you're still smiling.
Yes, just.
Right, I'm conscious we've been going for about an hour and 10 minutes on this one. So I've got two cabinet members who would obviously like to say something, one from a business point of view, one from a tourism point of view. So, Councillor Barnes, you've indicated, has your wife covered your question or not? Has your wife covered your question off or not? No, that's a shame, isn't it? John?
One of the slightly disappointing things, if I've read the figures right, is your visitor numbers were up, but your overall income appeared to be down. That seems to me slightly paradoxical. If the point I really wanted to go back to a little is about the very large number of elderly people in Rother, and in a way, this ought to be an asset for them as well. So I would be interested how you treat that balance between building a future audience, but somehow finding a way of appealing to what is, on the whole, a reasonably well-off generation of old people who probably could help you if they were recruited more as members than they are. And it leads me really to my second point, which is, with the best will in the world, you've hardly made any impact on the rural areas in the north of Rother. There are lots of electronic newsletters, but we never hear anything about the Delaware in there. It might be a way of actually promoting yourselves and helping the rural areas if you had some tandem tickets, say with the Vinyl Hall concerts or with the Achium Festival, because they are small, but they are there, they're in for classical, but they don't really hear about what's going on at the Delaware. And so I think a bit of marketing around that. And my last point, if the chair will forgive me, I think it's very important we explore as a totality, this is not just a challenge to you, but a challenge to us, how we actually turn visits to the Delaware into longer stays rather than overnight stays. Because it seems to me there is an awful lot in Rother. If we marketed it as an entity, we might get people staying less. You're turning of people into long-term visitors. Slightly disappointing, not your fault. I think that's as much our fault. But somehow we've got to crack that one.
Thank you. To start with your last point, we need a hotel. And in fact, if you look at the 1066 data across a number of years, there's quite a lot of overnight stays. They're really low value, and they're largely in the caravan parks where they're still trading. And I think we identified in our economic impact of 2007, there was two things that needed to be done, transport links and hotel accommodation, and they are still really critical. And I think it's probably worth noting that we've already lost a lot of audiences, particularly in evening trade, largely through the rail connections and the lack of hotel. And people would travel to come and see us, but have been put off without being able to get home. And I've had 600 people at Bexhill railway station with nowhere to go and not sure what to do with them. So I think we can try and rebuild that market, but if we've got the accommodation to provide that. But I think that's a rather wide issue as well, looking at those stats. The other things are, obviously there's a theme coming across just in terms of general comms. across the wider rural region. I would say that we've taken a big decision for a number of years now to rely on digital only. I think we looked at the return on investment on print, and we were spending a lot of money on print pre-pandemic, and decided to move forward in terms of digital communications and have been quite reliant on that. I mean, returning to the earlier point, we're actually pretty happy with sales.
It's just to break in there. I wasn't saying go back to print.
No.
There are digital communications out there that never carry an item about the Delaware, and you need to become aware of those and how you contact them.
Yeah, happy.
I'd just like to add that I have heard this before, and we spent quite a bit of time trying to reach out to various rural areas. Note it was pre-pandemic. There are lots of groups, in terms of Facebook groups, that won't accept us because we're not based in the area or in the small community that they serve. So, you can reach out so far. And that was the major response that we got. Things may have changed now, and maybe things are a little bit more accessible. But certainly, trying to join communities in the rural area proved very, very difficult.
But let's look at
Things may have
that. We're
changed.
really happy, and again, particularly, I think the rise of the classical program is a relatively recent phenomenon. And I think because we were waiting for market forces to support that type of programming, and as you say, that's probably more suitable to those audiences. So let's see what we can do. Absolutely. Have I answered all your questions?
I think so, but it would be, I can give you one or two of the e-bulletins who
Please.
wouldn't actually restrict your about.
That would be fantastic. And I always find that, if you've got a champion somewhere within a rural area, that always works. So we work very closely with the Battle and District Arts Group, for example, and they always help us out with some sort of cross-messaging. So, a champion or an ambassador in all the rural areas is incredibly helpful way of being in touch.
Right, thank you. Councillor Thomas, are you going to be brief?
Just going to ask you, reading your report is just amazing. Virtually everything that anyone can say to you that it would be good for you to do it, you're already doing it. It's extraordinary. I just want to say how much I love that great music concert. The idea of having a piece of music where different people could play at different levels and all play together was sensational. It was a wonderful thing. Marvellous. I just want to ask you about the greenness side of things. Your energy costs are huge. To what extent have you considered that you might be able to do something by generating your own electricity, etc., to reduce your electricity bill? The swimming baths in Exeter famously have got their bill right down by all kinds of green measures. I wonder whether you're looking for grants to do that kind of thing in the Delaware as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Firstly, it's worth saying just that we do report our energy use to something called Julie's Bicycle Club, but it's a mechanism for reporting that, and that's done on a really regular basis. And also, we did have a DC completed. Again, that was pre-pandemic, just in terms of kind of monitoring the baseline levels of the pavilion. What's really interesting, we had an initial environmental strategy done before we started the capital project by Borough Happold, who are quite up there in terms of this kind of technology. And then they are continuing to work through the capital project. There's some quite ambitious plans with the capital project. I think where we're struggling is in terms of costs. So we're just going through a cost review exercise at the moment, and we will see what we can actually deliver through that process and what's going to give us the best back. Solar panels, air source heat pumps, those kinds of things. What's been interesting as part of that process is also looking at being really ambitious. I think it's probably scared us in terms of the costs, but looking at things like ground source heat pumps that could potentially not only power the pavilion, but could, say, power the colonnade or other areas as well. and also looking at other local authorities, which I believe are even using things like data warehouses in order for heat recovery as well. So there's a number of options. I think we just need to synthesise that through the capital project because, of course, we want to reduce those costs. But it's looking at the life of the infrastructure that we've got at the moment. The pavilion is also like a sieve in terms of air security, in terms of air tightness. So just trying to work out what the cost is of actually making it airtight versus the return on investment there. So there's a lot of mileage to go, but it's definitely very squarely, and we've aligned ourselves with your priorities as well as Rother District Council. I should also say that my team also meets with Rother's Green Team, so they meet together and talk together as well. So there's a very close link between the two to make sure that we've got synergy between us. Thank you.
Right, Councillor Bayliss, you've been very patient. Obviously, you've got a point to make from the business position.
Yes, thank you. Well, thank you, Chair, for allowing me to come along today to comment on this report, because it is really important from economic development and regeneration perspective. I think I just want to make three sort of comments about economic development, about skills, and about support for local businesses. I mean, the Delaware, as Stuart has said, is a very large local employer. It employs a great deal of number of people. It also supports or has supported the Beeching Road development, and that has been, you know, a fantastic project. It was something that was started by the previous administration, but of course this administration has delivered it, and I don't think we could have done it as well as we have done without the support of the Delaware Pavilion. And of course, the Jobs Fair, that's a really spectacular. I've actually had a stand the previous year. This year, I was helping out on the stand for the Bexhill Academy, which is their first year actually at the Jobs Fair, and it was really good because I'd got the sort of deputy head there who's responsible for community engagement. I were able to take her around and introduce her to loads of various different employers, which I know has been really useful for her. So even, you know, apart from the fact that we found people to do some of the jobs that we got advertised, it was really important from that sort of perspective of networking. I mean, the thing that stuck out for me in the report is, you know, the amount of money that's brought in. If you look at those visitor stays, and if you look at the amount of stays that we have, and I know we want to get it up from one night maybe to more, but it's still £3.7 million that comes in to the local economy, which sort of shows you what a fabulous investment really the subsidy that we give the Delaware each year. The other thing on skills I wanted to quickly talk about, the apprenticeship programme is really, really impressive. The development of this scheme, which now runs right the way across, and I know that I met Stuart actually last week for a briefing session, and we talked about a venue from West Sussex coming over who wants to join in this in this apprenticeship programme, which is, you know, training up people to do all these sort of technical skills, you know, in the pavilion. And what warms my heart, and I know it's going to warm Councillor Cook's heart, is Littlegate Farm. So I was at a Littlegate Farm presentation just in July when they were handing out their certificates for their apprenticeships, and I met Iffy, who has been an apprentice at the Delaware Pavilion on a Thursday, working in the gallery, and she's now, I think, full-time employee. Not full-time, but permanent member of the staff, and this is working with, you know, people from Littlegate Farm who you know may struggle, you know, to find employment, and I've always been really steadfast in my support for them, because I think job creation has to be for everyone, everybody. And then sort of finally about the benefit for local businesses. If, you know, I often pick up on Facebook, you know, people, you know, local businesses will be very supportive of the pavilion and what it does in terms of sustaining jobs. And so you talk to a local restaurateur who will tell you that they'll do their staffing rota according to the Delaware Pavilion's programme of events. They're actually staffing up and looking at that, because if anyone, you know, knows, if you go into Bexhill early evening for a meal and there's something really big on at the pavilion, it's absolutely throbbing. You know, there's just lots and lots and lots of people around. So looking to the future, I sort of think, you know, this. The support right across the district is really important, and we you know, and if I can help on getting the word out to rural communities, that's great. When we met, you talked about some of the issues with the Creative Centre in Rye. I've picked that up with Councillor McGirt, and I'm actually going over to have a look at that this week, because there's going to be a planning application coming in. So thank you to that, and that's the benefit, I think, of joint working. I think planning for the closure is going to be really interesting, and maybe this is a time to sort of think outside the box. If you're planning for a closure, why not base yourself away from the pavilion and be still doing some of your arts programmes, but not actually, you know, maybe, you know, taking them out into the community. I'm sure you've already got some thoughts about that, but those are the sorts of things. And of course, the big, you know, thing that we're trying to solve as part of the regeneration team is, where do we put a hotel in Bexhill? Where can we find a hotel? And I know we've been talking to operators and what have you about bringing a hotel, but it is, you know, one of the sorts of keys. If we can unlock that will be, you know, really good, and will help with the sort of long-term stays. So thank you. A good report and lots to do.
Thank you. Hazel, tourism point of view.
I'll keep this really brief. Yeah, I mean, I'm privileged to be on the board, the trust. So I see all sorts of both sides of everything. It's been a very, very difficult few years, hasn't it? And I think that the support that that RODA gives monetarily is minuscule as far as the return we get on that sort of investment. If you actually add up all the things that they do, which I'm sure half the people in our district actually don't know about, which goes back to your point. And I really believe that as councillors, it's our job as well, instead of sort of saying, oh, well, you know, well, gosh, I don't really know what they do here, or there, or wherever. Is you know, read this report, learn from it, because the activities are phenomenal, and they're not just for the young, or you know, it's a really wide range. And Stuart's they're very humble, I think. But I mean, this is, if you looked at this and the amount of work that goes into every single thing that happens. And I'd echo Christine's point about the closure. I really believe that the businesses that do benefit from when the Delaware has their events, that's going to have a huge impact. So it's up to us locally, I think, to try to, I don't quite know how we solve that, but it's going to be a huge loss when you are closed, because you're going to have to be because of the refurbishment. But from a tourism standpoint, the number of visitors that come, the number of people that return, it's a phenomenal asset for us. And if I could give you more, I would. But it's not up to me, it's up to everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, well, I suppose I'd better say thank you very much for your time, Stuart. You've had an hour and a half of go. I'm sure you're probably due a beer now. Thanks, Sally Ann, for coming in as well. Thanks, Joe, for the work.
You've missed me, Chairman.
Oh, Maynard. I thought I was getting away with it there. Go on then, Carl, be quick.
Thank you very much. I'll be as quick as other members have been. No, I will be quicker. Can I just thank, obviously, Stuart and Sally Ann. I mean, you've been coming along for many years. I think Sally Ann's actually been coming along for longer in terms of how long she's been with the Delaware Pavilion. It's thanks to Jill, obviously, to them for all that they do. I think the point that's been raised by a lot of members is how the Delaware Pavilion continues to interface not just with those that come and visit from the wider area, but from those that obviously fund the Delaware Pavilion through their council tax and in terms of reaching out to the rural areas. So I think that what's already been said, I certainly think needs amplifying if we can further investigate reaching out to rural schools within Rother, because certainly raising the profile of what the Delaware Pavilion are actually doing, not just in Bexhill, but in terms of some of that outreach work, I think would be really, really useful. Especially for those who are several miles away from Bexhill itself. I mean, we are 200 square miles of Rother, and everybody within that 200 square miles is making a contribution. So I think in order to, further, exaggerate, but also, genuinely encapsulate, if you like, the work that Delaware Pavilion do, I think it'd be really useful to see a further extension of that work, particularly with those rural schools. The only other thing I'd like to raise is certainly in terms of, we've had obviously a very thorough presentation today. There have been a lot of questions. We normally have it to council. I just wanted to clarify, and perhaps this one's to Lorna, in terms of how we've normally had the annual presentation to council. Now we've got obviously this in front of us this evening with a very fulsome report. But I do think that all members, I hope, will look at the presentation that's been given tonight, watch the webcast, but also look at the papers in front of them. But I do wonder whether, in fact, it should in fact return to a council when we've got a lighter agenda, because it's interesting, isn't it? Ordinarily, when we have a presentation to council, this is over in half an hour, 45 minutes. Tonight, here we are at 8 o'clock. And to have that little bit more forensic look at what's been a far more detailed report, I think is actually very useful. So I don't know which the happiest medium would be, but I certainly think that given the amount of money that we do fund to the Delaware Pavilion, given the importance in the overall strategy for us as a district, whether it ought to go back to full council, I don't know. It's something I think we need to think about. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. I think I could probably agree with you there, because it used to come to scrutiny many years ago, and I got it moved to full council because I thought it'd be a better benefit to all members seeing it. But now it's come back because we can properly sort of more scrutinise it easier than at full council. But maybe we can get over it. Any thoughts, Lorna?
Thanks, Chair. I do think overview and scrutiny is the right place so we can have a full discussion. I think it's a great deal of money that we put into the Delaware. We get an awful lot out for that. And we can't go to this level of questioning at full council. And I do hope that all members are encouraged to have a look at the presentation at least. And perhaps we can encourage that. But I feel this is the right place. Full council is too formal. And, perhaps we can look at the programme, though, and make sure that we've got quite a lot on the agenda this evening. So we might be able to make sure we're spreading out that business. But personally, I think this has been a really, really good debate. I think members have had the opportunity to ask the questions that they wanted to ask. So I think we should give it another go at Overview and Scrutiny Committee. But we can discuss that, Chair.
Okay. Right. Really?
One sentence, Chairman. I think what would be useful is to make a brief report to council, not the detail, but a brief report so they know what we've done. I think this is the right place, though, to do this scrutiny.
We can have a discussion and work it out. Well, I'll go back to it, Stuart. I'll say thanks for coming in, thanks for your time, thanks Sally Ann, thanks Joe for working with it. Yeah. I think what we'll quickly do is resolve that the performance report of the Chief Executive Officer and the Delaware Pavilion Trust be noted. Someone to move that. Councillor Cook.
Happy to move, Chair.
Someone to second it. Councillor Thomas. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Stuart. Thank you very much, Sally Ann. Free to go. I wouldn't want to sit here any longer.
May I just say thank you, and thanks for all that feedback as well. We've got some notes, so we'll definitely respond to those points as well. Thanks for your support, and see you next year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Stuart. Thank you. See you. Right. Moving on. Item 6. Anna, time to come round.
I'm ready.
You're ready.
So this is the first quarter performance report for 24-25. As I put in the report, we report by exception. So whether performance is significantly above or significantly below target. There isn't actually anything in the performance figures that's significantly below or above. So what I've highlighted in the report is actually where we're marginally below target. So going through the report, and please interrupt me at any point. The first one that is marginally below target is the percentage of freedom of information requests answered in 20 working days. The target is 100%, and currently we're running at 82.8%. Now, this doesn't mean that we've missed anything that we should have done, because Mark and the team have gone and got authorisation to take a bit longer because the nature of the query is quite complicated. So we're still meeting our legal obligations, even though it's slightly less than 100%. I'll move on.
Can I just quickly interrupt you on that one, Anna? We were sort of talking in our little pre-meet, and we just wondered, do we? How much information do we get on these? Do we get a sort of a name and address? Obviously, you've got to send a reply to them, but do we know if these are Rother people or nationwide people or newspapers or journalists or students or is it the same person being a pain in the neck?
I've got the expert next to me, but they could come from anywhere. You don't have to be a Rother resident to put a freedom of information request in. And we do get people doing research. We do people, it could be literally anything. But I'm going to, if it's okay, check with Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Anna. I can answer that better myself. They can come from anywhere, so it can be universities, many companies doing market research to find out a bit more information, looking at a variety of things. It does vary. There's no control over this, so it can come from any source.
Weird.
So I think we do have very little control about the number of freedom of information requests that are made, but we have spoken at committee before about making sure we publish all our responses, and we've probably got a little bit more work to do in that area to make sure that everything is on the website. But the team do check everything, and if we have already previously answered that FOI, it's a lot easier and we can direct the customer to that.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Good, yeah, carry on.
The next one, again, this is another one of Mark's. This is the customer services channel shift from traditional methods of contact over to digital. So we would like to be at 65% of our contact be online. And at the moment we are, let's have a look, we are 59.43%. So it isn't where we want to be, but this is work in progress. We have got a plan to try and improve the digital contact, but pleasingly, it is better than we have been before. Previously, it was at 56%, well, for this time last year. Any questions, or shall I move on? Okay. The next one is one that always comes up in quarter one, which is the environmental services percentage of scheduled food inspections. Again, we're slightly below target, but it's a bit of an anomaly for this time of year. It's nothing to be concerned about. Richard Parker Harding isn't concerned. It's just what happens, and we tend to catch up during the year.
Yeah, I think we've had this before, and the amount of inspections they have to do on a yearly basis, the mind boggles, doesn't it? And you think, well, I'm not surprised you get slightly behind, because it's literally dozens a day, isn't it, almost? So
it is, and I think they do a really good job to catch up, and they always do catch up, which is comforting to know. The next one is the income from all assets. Because of a expected rent reduction for one of our lessees, I can't really say that properly, we've got a £59,000 deficit. But we have got the strategic asset management plan, and I've got Joe with me at the moment, but we have plans to make sure that all the rent reviews for other assets are done on time, and we've got other plans to try and increase the income coming into Rother.
That's good, because the man here will be on your case otherwise.
Yes, he already is, so that's good. The next one is the average number of weeks a household is in temporary accommodation before placement. The target is 15 weeks, and for quarter one, we're at 23.16 weeks. It is not where we want to be, but there's a very good reason. It's because we've got larger families who require bigger homes. I think there's a need for 3-bedroom homes, and these are quite difficult to find.
I think Councillor Barnes has a question on that one. Thank you.
Yes, I sympathise with the problem. I'm just wondering whether in our capital acquisitions for our own stock, whether we are actually going to acquire some 3 and 4 bedroom houses.
So thank you, Councillor. We are on our temporary accommodation acquisitions. That's the meat of our acquisitions of 3 bedrooms houses, but that does not, unfortunately, that reduces the cost of accommodating them, but that doesn't fall short on the number of weeks they're in temporary accommodation, unfortunately. There are objectives, and it seems the way, as yourself as chair of the Task and Finish Group for the Housing Development Strategy, we do need to consider this urgent and pressing need, and the number of different ways in which we can realise more accommodation of this sort, permanent accommodation.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, because it's all right us having a 3 or 4 bedroom accommodation on a temporary basis. It's finding somewhere permanent, which is the ongoing issue going forward, isn't it? So yeah, okay, thanks. Oh, Charlie.
I'm going to follow on from that, because it's been a problem for a number of years, the lack of 4-bedroom accommodation. And when someone turns up at the door to the owners, and I've got 6 kids, you know, all varying ages, it won't be resolved in the short term, but we're still having to house people in temporary accommodation outside of Rother, which is, you know, something we try to avoid as much as possible. But it's only by continuing to buy properties that we are, and we have made inroads in that and done quite well over the last 3 or 4 years. Really pleased about that. That's the only way we're going to resolve it, you know. It's always a problem, 4-bedroom properties. Very.
The next 2 you'll see are about the public land found with unacceptable levels of litter or detritus. Again, they're only marginally below where we want to be, and there are reasons for it. One of them is a bit of a snapshot in time about when surveys are undertaken, and the other one is about heavy rainfall and stuff like that, which causes a bit of a problem. But again, we're only marginally below where we should be, and I think we can be assured that our Neighbourhood Services Manager monitors this contract extremely closely. The next one is the percentage of major development applications determined in 13 weeks. This is a bit of a blip this month, this quarter rather. It should be 80% and we're at 75%. This was due to a technical error which has now been resolved. And we are planning on getting our new iDocs software, which should further support the achievement of that target. Yep, carry on. We are now on to the revenues and benefits. There are a couple here that are below where we should be. So this is the percentage for council tax and business rates owed for the year that has been collected. They're marginally lower, again, for this period, but they're not of concern. But the service manager wanted to bring to everybody's attention that KPI RB3, which is the average number of calendar days to process a new housing benefit claim or a council tax reduction claim, is reported at exceeding targets. So it's showing that it's 12 days against a 20-day target. but these figures are artificially inflated because there's some automatic processing. So the revenues and benefits team are short of resources, and it is an area that the senior leadership team are looking at to improve resources, look at different ways of working and looking at resilience. But I didn't want people to think that we were doing really well in that area because it's an automatic process.
Yeah, I think that would be one that we, as members, would be concerned about, because a few years ago we was in a right pickle with that sort of department when we spent a lot of time and effort, and we outsourced it to Capita, I think, or somebody to get us back on track. So yeah, I think it's good of the service manager to actually highlight that, and hopefully we can get that out of the way. John?
Thank you for the comments. Yes, I'll note that, Councillor Barnes, and we are keeping an eye on it. I'm pretty much finished. I was just going to finish by saying that we continue to do the performance boards with all the service managers, where we look at their performance, we look at their risks, any issues they're facing, and I think we're getting a lot of good information from those performance boards.
Everybody happy? Yeah. So what we got here? Resolved performance report. The Chief Executive Officer. Oh, wrong one. Get it together. I thought I'd go to a paper version because it's easier. Resolved that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee consider these findings and recommend any actions to Cabinet as necessary. Well, I think we've made our points and Anna's answered them. So, someone happy to move it? Councillor Cook, seconder.
Yeah,
Councillor.
I'm very happy to move it, but I also would like it noted that we thank Anna for this another very clear, easy to read, easy to understand, with lots of explanations for why some of the things aren't as we would have liked them to be. And I'd like her to be thanked for that. Thank you.
Yep, Karen, yep, echo that. Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Creaser. All those in favour? Good, it's carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Anna. Item 7, draft council plan, 24 to 28, pages 123 to 184. 123, right. Report of Lorna, all wards. Review the draft council plan as part of the consultation process. Resolved that comments from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee and the draft council plan be fed back to Cabinet as part of this consultation process. I think it came from Cabinet from last week, didn't it? Lorna?
Thank you, Chair. As you say, we're here this evening as part of the consultation process on the council plan. I think it's fair to say that most of what is in the council plan won't be sort of, you'll be expecting to see it basically, because this really has brought together a number of existing strategies, including a lot of engagement on our local plan, but also our climate strategy. So I'm just going to run through the sort of main structure of the report. I'm hoping you have read it, and I'm hoping you've got some comments this evening. But what I would say is if you wanted to make individual comments on the plan, that's also fine. So the plan is structured around sort of a long-term vision for Rother, the Rother district. And this was brought together through consultation with members and members of staff over sort of the last 6 months or so. And it has very strong alignment to our local plan. It really is kind of the version of what the council does, of what we're trying to achieve through our spatial planning and what we are doing as a council to achieve those outcomes too. So it's structured around sort of 4 themes. The first is a thriving local economy, which will very much set the direction for our regeneration strategy, which is forthcoming hopefully later this year, and also aligns to our county strategy. The next theme is Live Well Locally, which you'll recognise from our local plan, and I will come to talk on to what the main sort of objectives are under these themes. Green to the Core, which again I think you'll recognise through our climate strategy and the work we've been doing around the local plan. And then finally, Fit for the Future, which isn't really for consultation in part of this plan, but it's pulling it all together into one document. That programme started about 18 months ago, involves work streams around making the most of our assets, our digital strategy, which we'll be looking at later on the agenda, financial resilience, which is all the savings work that Andrew has been taking forward, and our people strategy, which an awful lot of work has been done on that over this year and has now been adopted. But this is an opportunity to bring all that work together. And the audience for this plan, just before we get into the detail, is really, it's for staff, it's for members, it's for our partners, it's for stakeholders, it's for government and our funders. It's probably not in this form necessarily a document for our residents, but we will use it to communicate what we are doing with residents. And of course, in the future, having a plan like this and having clear objectives helps us prioritise what we do in future and gives a framework and explains the reasons why we are doing some of the projects and work that we are doing. So the document also sets out our target operating model and values, and this work was very much contained within our people strategy. And that target operating model around being efficient and effective, taking an empowering approach, focusing on our customer outcomes and early intervention and a community leader, that's very much driving the way that we work. And it's important that I think we start to communicate that more widely. And the values in the plan about, which very much are roots, and we have a mnemonic there of root being, that stands for respect, being open, being outcomes focused and working together with our partners aligns really nicely, I think, with that operating model. So just looking a little bit at each of these themes in turn. So we have, the structure of the plan is to have a sort of outline headline strategic outcome, so on a thriving economy. It's about making sure that we make the most of the significant investment in our district and creating the right conditions to grow our economy, boost skills and deliver well-paid and higher value jobs, and that the district is recognised as a world-class visitor destination. And underneath each of those these strategic outcomes, we've listed a number of objectives. I'm not going to read them all out because of time this evening, but you can see them. So that is under paragraph 19. You can see the objectives there under a thriving economy. The next strategic outcome is Live Well Locally, and this really does touch on many of our council services and working with our partners too. So we want to be recognised as being an inclusive and fair district, playing the delivery of affordable homes and working with partners to support the wellbeing of our residents. We will enhance the quality of our residents' lives by enabling provision of good quality leisure facilities and access to open spaces. And paragraph 21 sets out the objectives under there. And then moving on to Green to the Core. This is a very, very strong alignment with our climate strategy. So really it's just pulling out those high-level things for our climate strategy and making sure we're delivering on those and that we're communicating what we are delivering. So the outcome here is by taking bold action to tackle climate change and protect the environment in all that we do, we will make the district climate resilient and reduce council emissions to net zero by 2030. I have put Fit for the Future in here, and there's a bit of a mistake in the report actually. It says that we'll be asking questions about Fit for the Future in the consultation. To be honest, that would be a bit disingenuous to do that because we've already started that programme. Other businesses and organisations may want to comment on it, but that is something that we're well on the road to kind of taking forward. So we've taken that question out of the consultation. So paragraph 26 of the report just explains the consultation that's gone out, and then obviously this has gone widely to our partners, stakeholders, parish councils, town councils, and a whole variety of other groups. And the questions are really just focused on to what extent people agree with that vision for Rother to 2040, and to what extent do they support the strategic outcomes to 2028 around those three themes: a thriving economy, live well locally, and green to the core. And there's an opportunity for any other comments as well. So, as I say, there's been a great deal of engagement already, but very interested to hear the views of Overview and Scrutiny Committee. We've only in this draft put the very high-level actions. There is a more detailed action plan, the who, what, where, when kind of things that is being pulled together at the moment underneath this strategy, and also more work on the success measures and the key performance indicators that are also set out under each theme. And more work's been done there on baselining if it's a new measure and setting targets for the future. So really very interested to hear the committee's views. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Who did you say drafted this?
It's been a combination of people that have drafted it, I mean, all the heads of service have contributed to this. We've had a very collaborative way of working. But Alice so this is Alice Nolan who works in my team. She's very much pulled this together and done the drafting of it, and I think she's done an excellent job, and working with Anna too. And Anna also she's done nothing, but she's very much helped with this document too. So being steered by me, but pulled together very much by Alice, who's done a really good job.
Yeah, I thought that was the case. That's why I thought I'd tease out her name so everybody knows who's actually done it. Because it is, you look at it and it's one of those that you think, oh, that many? Oh, how many people? Eh? Oh. And there's a lot of information, and it's easy to take on board, and it's got photographs, so it's not completely dry. And yeah. Councillor Cook first, and Councillor Byrne.
Just a very quick question. Under consultation questions, paragraph 26, it says overall, do you support the vision for Rother to 2040? But then do you support the strategic outcomes to 2028? Was that deliberate? What was the reasoning behind that?
Yes, the idea is that the idea of setting a longer-term vision is to give hooks to other strategies. So you've got a kind of long-term vision that we're working to, and different strategies have different lengths. Now, the length of the corporate plan is to 2028. So for this document, we're achieving, what are we going to achieve against those outcomes to 2028? But we've got a longer-term vision there aligned to our local plan, that when we're doing the regeneration strategy or we're doing housing strategy, we've got a longer-term vision that we can work towards.
Thank you.
Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Chair. This is a wonderfully readable document. It's easy sometimes to say, well, it's all motherhood and apple pie, we're going to do this. I think the really interesting thing will be to see how other authorities see their role. This is a balanced way forward for the community. It's not seeking to push a left agenda, a right agenda, a sort of maniacal green agenda where we've all got to move out into mud huts and have grass on our roof. But it includes all those strands into what looks like a proper vision for the future. So, yes, it's good. Yes, you could criticise and you could go through it saying, well, yeah, everyone wants that. But if you look at some of the other councils, you'd be amazed at the sort of narrow alleys they're going down. So I think we should be very proud of ourselves for endorsing this. I think you've done a wonderful job putting it together. Thank you.
Councillor Barnes, John?
Yes, forgive me if I'm slightly less happy. There are bits of this which I think you can see how you're going to operationalise this and measure your success. The climate change one is a model there, I think. I'm less sure about some of the other sections, whether we don't really need, and of course we haven't got the action plan in front of us. But some of the aspirations seem to me, I just don't know quite what my measurable goal would be to deliver. I also had one very specific criticism, and I support the objective, which is to encourage inward investment. But when I looked at the three things that were singled out there, Well-paid jobs in the creative sector, not altogether sure. The pop industry, perhaps, but most jobs in the creative sector are not that well paid. I wish they were. And musicians particularly aren't well paid. The medical centre, I can't quite see how that is actually going to. I support the project. I think it's absolutely essential, and we need to deliver it. But I'm not sure it really fits under that section. And the third one is classic of, direction of travel, absolutely fine, but how are we going to do it? So I'm left with that sort of question occasionally as I go through. I think it's a good test. How are we going to know we've done it? Is by 2028. Would be my test.
I think particularly on this theme, we've tried to sort of look at what we are already doing. You're right, you spotted something, and then frame it in a strategic context. Some of these projects have already started, and of course, with something like Barnhorn Green, there were jobs, well-paid jobs associated with the delivery of that project. And what we've tried to do is rather than link the success measures to each of those actions, where you start to get into this really kind of difficult thought process of, exactly what will that contribution be to this outcome, we have taken a more pragmatic approach and looked at the success measures on the next page and measuring things like business survival rates, empty units, and over the longer term, average weekly salary is not going to change much, but over the longer term and to 2028, we hope to see the activities and interventions we are undertaking will lead us to an improvement in those measures. So it isn't like a linear kind of, this is the action, this is the outcome, but this is a basket of things that we are doing. We did think about, for some things, doing a more sort of social return on investment type approach, but the truth is you can put lots and lots of work into something like that, and you spend more time measuring stuff, and then actually we've probably got the capacity to do, and it's about getting on and doing these actions. But the other thing, under this theme in particular, is this is kind of the starting point. In much the same way, so if we have the climate strategy already, and that's already been developed and is being implemented, on the local economy side, we will be producing an economic development regeneration strategy. That's to come. So this document gives hooks to that document, and it also reflects the county-wide strategy on the industrial strategy for the county. So that's kind of how this is working, and we are doing work to be more, a smarter action plan. But I suppose for the purposes of the consultation, what other things are going on when we go out and we speak to the Chamber of Commerce, or we speak to, a town council or a parish council, what are they doing to contribute to this agenda, and do we need to reflect that back in our plan too? As a partner, can we support other activities? So that's the sort of thing I'm hoping to get back through the consultation process. But yeah, there is more information if anybody wants it on those success measures. We have got baselines and we're working on targets too.
I thought the ones on page 7, although they don't cover the full spectrum, are the right sort of measures because they are quantifiable and we can see we're going in the right direction. The other thing which I'd just like to say is, of course, the Housing Task Force will probably come up with a bit more detail to help you on the way we take forward, because it's clearly one of our most important targets over the next 4 or 5 years to increase our housing supply one way or another, and above all, affordable housing.
Are the consultation timescale 6 weeks and starting probably soon?
It's started.
It's started, so end of sort of October?
Yes, I wish I could remember that day on the top of my head. It's about then, yes. I expect it says it in the report, I just can't remember it. Yes, it is 6 weeks. And the reason we didn't do a 12-weeker like we did for the local plan was because we've already used a lot of the engagement from those other strategies. And I always think, if you've kind of consulted on it already, you know, you should use that information that's already there.
Good. Oh, Councillor Thomas.
Yes, I very much like this document. I like the way in which it's set out. I like the way in which it talks about aims, objectives, policies, and then how you're going to measure the effectiveness of them. I think the structure of it is absolutely excellent, and I like the ideas within it as well. So I was very impressed by it. The one thing that I would say is really what Councillor Barnes was saying. I'd like to see, and it's not going to surprise anybody in this room that I'm about to say this, I would like to see a greater priority to the housing side of things. And I would argue that the housing side of things is one of the key factors in the cost of living crisis. I think there are two main drivers of that, the fuel crisis and the housing crisis. And we can't do much about the fuel crisis, but we can do something about the housing crisis. So I'd just like to remind everybody that the original objectives of the housing company involved building 1,000 homes, not just the 200 of Blackfriars, and I'd like to see that prioritised. I'd like to see more about affordable housing explicit within the document. So I think that's something I would like to really stress. And I would also like to see more about the idea of the pipeline of projects. Because if this is looking forward to 2040, it's not just enough to say, this is what we're going to do in the next 4 years. We've got to start looking at that pipeline and making sure we deliver the 1,000 houses.
Thanks, Councillor Thomas, and I'm not surprised you said that at all. No, but I think a lot of that sort of pipeline and sort of looking at that mix of housing tenure and exactly what we need for the future will be addressed in the housing strategy. So I don't want to preempt the work that is happening there. We will be reviewing the council plan on an annual basis, and you know, if there are other priorities when that strategy is finalised that need to come forward to the council plan, we can certainly do that. But I do agree with you, it is one of the most important things we do as a council and needs to be reflected in our council plan. It's where we can really make a difference.
I think one of the issues you could say with housing supply, and you've mentioned low cost or affordable housing, but the disconnect that I see is that, you know, in my own ward, literally 3 weeks ago, we had a development put forward for 42 homes, of which originally 40% was supposed to be affordable, but the developer whimpers and grizzles and said they can't afford it. So then we have to vote it through all market property. And I've got another one in my ward coming up similar. It's only a 15 development, so it's not going to change the world. But you know, this is where in this document do we, you know, where can we put it in stone almost? Because it's all right us having, you know, we've had the 40%, the 40% affordable isn't a surprise to any developer coming into this patch because we've had it for 15 years. But now they come in and then they argue the affordability thing, and then if we don't vote it through, they just go to appeal and get it anyway. And then we don't get the new homes bonuses that still exist, and we don't get this, we don't get that. So it's an awkward one. Now I've got too many hands up.
Can I just come back?
If you come back.
You know, I think we must see the council plan sitting alongside the local plan, and a lot of that is addressed through the local plan, that mix of what we are trying to achieve. But I think also, as I say, the housing strategy is the place for that sort of information. I think we're setting out our high-level aspirations in the council plan, and it can't do all of those jobs. We have better, there are other plans that are better placed to do that. So I wouldn't want to overburden it with very specialist, either on the housing side or the local planning side, sort of information that is probably too detailed really for a plan of this sort.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just come back on that. If you look at this document, there are some very specific things in it. And if we go back to the previous plan, which is on page 123 of our notes, it does actually specify particular things, increasing the supply of affordable houses throughout the district and housing list reduction. So there are very specific policies like that and objectives in the previous iteration of the plan, and I'd like to see something like that brought into this one. But the point made by the Chair is really important. There is a danger that private companies simply won't do it. And if the government, with the best intention in the world, says to private developers, you must deliver more affordable housing, there is a risk, I won't say more than that, there's a risk that private developers will sit on their land banks and do nothing. That's the risk. So that's where I think we go back to the implication of what the Chair said. If they're not going to do it, we need to do it ourselves.
Councillor Barnes, John?
Yes, we're in danger of taking the discussion almost into too much detail, but there is a role, I think, which we're looking at on the Housing Task Force for seeing whether we shouldn't take over some part of the role of developer. Again, encouraging the small builders to come back into the market. But there are some real problems, and I'm not sure how we overcome them. The problem with relatively small developments is that you don't always find that the housing associations will take over a small number of affordable houses. And then there's the other problem, of course, which is the housing associations themselves want to develop 100% affordable and squeeze out the market housing altogether. And we are in some danger of getting back into the thing that we were all hoping to avoid in the local plan, of monoculture developments. It's not quite the same because shared ownership is part of Housing England's remit. But I have to say some of the terms on which shared housing is made available by housing associations leaves a great deal to be desired.
Sue, sorry about that, I missed you.
That's all right.
Then I missed you again and then again, but anyway, you're
It's
on.
all right. I'll be very brief. I also want to make some comments about the success measures that you've listed. I have listened very carefully to the balance of what you're saying and other plans, but I still think I'd like to mention them. The one in relation to housing, the one particular here is proportion of housing in fuel poverty, of individuals in fuel, households in fuel poverty. I would say that a well-insulated home is the way to get away from fuel poverty, that there are other ways to achieve this other than financial. So that I'd be highlighting EPC, C and above, insulation, that we are the planning authority, so that I think that could be considered alongside or for the future as a possible target. I'd like to also mention another possible idea is active travel journeys as being a target of how we measure our success. Again, it links to this authority and East Sussex, but they come together. And bus, train, walk, cycle journeys are really important, a measure of success, and well-being and health, they all link together. So I would have maybe a higher priority in the future for that. And my final comment, I am brief, is measure of success is number of community lottery tickets sold. And I don't think that's really for the benefit of residents. It's for our benefit. And yes, I support the community lottery, but is it a success for our residents, I would say.
I actually agree with you, particularly on the community lottery tickets sold. It's kind of an input kind of measure, and I don't really like that as a measure. And absolutely up for discussing what we do measure that is sort of meaningful, makes sense, and shows progress. And I think that one should possibly be looked at, actually. And I suppose I will go back and look at some of the measures in the environment strategy and the climate strategy, because I think that might be in there. We've sort of selected the ones that we feel are most sort of relevant to bother, and I accept there's other people that contribute to that agenda as well, but it's absolutely about making sure we're measuring things that actually mean something. So I'll definitely take those comments away and have a look at it. Thank you.
Right, are we reasonably happy with that? Oh, did you want to speak, Cheryl? No, that's yeah, she did in the end. We got some notes and we
good
got
feedback there.
stuff, everything on that. Good. So any comments that we've made that have been fed back to Cabinet? So someone happy to move that? Councillor Creaser, seconded. Councillor Thomas, all those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Next one is item 8, recommendations from the Digital and Customer Services Strategy Task and Finish Group, page 185. What have we got here? Present a draft Digital Customer Services Strategy as a result of the work completed by the Task and Finish Group. Officer recommendations be resolved that 1. Cabinet be requested to recommend to Council that the draft Digital and Customer Services Strategy attached to Appendix A be approved and adopted, and 2. Digital and Customer Services Strategy Task and Finish Group be disbanded as the terms of reference have been met. Councillor Cook was the chairman of it and Mark is here. Who wants to kick off? You, Councillor Cook?
Thank you. At the last Task and Finish meeting, we worked to create a user-friendly, attractive document which we planned to take to overview and scrutiny back in July. And I loved the way that Mark had set it out. It was really readable, much as the council plan we've just looked at. And I thought we'd agreed a much simpler version with graphics to break up the text. Now, I appreciate that since then, this has been expanded to show the alignment with the LGA and central government, but also the council plan and the people strategy, which weren't around when we last met. I know Mark has worked incredibly hard on this, but I do want to make certain that it will still be a document that customers, especially if they're angry and frustrated, can find the information they need quickly. There are several documents, the communication strategy, the customer charter, the KPIs and workstream details still to be added to this document, and I'm really not sure we should ask Council to approve this without sight of them. We've had 3 very long reports this evening with much very valuable discussion, and I really would not like to see this rushed through with insufficient time for the proper and detailed scrutiny it deserves. I love the corporate feel linking with the council, local and corporate plans, and I don't want to prolong this process, but I wonder if there might be a benefit in postponing the discussion tonight and asking for just one more meeting to see if a compromise can be achieved to try and make it a little less wordy, more accessible, and add back some of Mark's great digital graphics, which seem to have found their way into the council plan that we looked at earlier, and create an easy read version for our customers. Thank you.
Mark, yeah, it's been a long evening.
No, it
a
has been
sidewinder, so I'll leave it to you.
It has been a long evening. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Cook, for your comments. The strategy, I suppose the idea was that would create a document that can try and contain, our outline on no more than 4 pages, but there has to be the reference to, some of the key strategies that relate to it, particularly to the alignment to the local government association, central government, but also our council plan, along with the people strategy, the climate strategy. There are many hooks that it does link in. It is really vital that they are explicitly shown to this, maybe not in the detail, but it does outline this, particularly as well as the challenges, our demographics. It's really important to give a kind of a good overview in terms of how they impact our way forward in terms of not only the digital side, but also the customer side. They feed up our challenges, and some of that incorporates, the customer need, having that framework that builds on also, like I say, the council plan, our target operating model, those behavioural frameworks. So it's really hard to contain that within a document that is, no more than 4 pages, but this is why it suddenly expanded into the document it is presented. So, and I'm happy to take those recommendations forward. Yes, it is missing some elements, particularly, I would say, the action plan. There's a lot of detail in that. It is into sort of 18-page long, the action plan, so it would extend it even more. So it is more that strategic direction that would like members to look for in this. But like I say, happy to open the discussion out with what's presented in the document and go forward from there.
Okay, which cabinet were you looking at? Because there's full council next week, so it wouldn't make that one, obviously, would it? Because it's not on the agenda. So the cabinet would be October.
Is it in November?
So then the council we're referring to would be the one just prior to Christmas.
Yeah, for adoption.
So would there be time for, if Councillor Mrs Cook is desperately unhappy, maybe not desperately unhappy, she's not quite ecstatic. Would there be time to have one of the task and finish group just have a final meeting? Would that satisfy?
Chairman, I do have, sorry to interrupt, I do happen to know I've got a similar report going up on the disposal policy, which is going to October scrutiny, November Cabinet, Council in December.
So we can do that. Yeah. Councillor Barnes?
Yes, I think the problem we get into with our strategies is they have two distinct purposes. One is inward facing. It's very much a guide to our senior management team and the officers about the direction we want to go to travel. But we also need, in some of these areas, particularly I suggest this one, because large numbers of people still, either because they haven't got proper access to the internet or because they're scared of it, don't take it up. We need an outward-facing document. And it seems to me that it would be quite useful if the task force could address that question. Because if we had a major inward-facing document, but a good public-facing summary, it might actually, and the public-facing summary could have a lot more visual aids than the inward one, which wouldn't need it. And that might actually be a very sensible way forward for a lot of our strategies.
Just looking at it here now, I think a lot of the sort of strategic fit to this strategy could actually be in an appendix or something like that. And what we need to do is pull forward that customer charter, because you're right, that's what's going to mean something to our customers. And you talk about it being an internal document as well, and that is important because the priorities in this strategy will help us prioritise a very, very long list of projects that I know Mark's got on his in his in-tray. Not that we have in-trays anymore because we're digital, but I do think it would just help to take a step back, look at the structure, all the right ingredients is here with those additional chapters coming through, and just think about how it needs to read from an external facing document, what it means to our customers, how we will use the strategy to prioritise our activity. And I think if we can do those two things, the kind of how it fits with the people strategy, our corporate plan, the government's agenda, we can put that into appendices, and I think that will make it a much more sort of readable document, and we can have a look at some of the then we can look at bringing some of those graphics back into it, I think, Mark. And I think it would be helpful to have a discussion with the task and finish group, and I think we can still stay on track to get this approved by the end of December, so at full council. So yeah, I think we can take that away.
Councillor Byrne, I think this is your sort of bag as well, isn't it?
This is a very, very small comment. It's almost nitpicking. Paragraph 4, line 4, the word should be necessarily, not necessary. So if paragraph 4 survives through the various iterations, you can blame ChatGPT, Mark. Thank you.
Councillor Raponero, this is your sort of cabinet portfolio. Anything you wish to add or?
Yeah, just so everyone's aware, I took this on in May. So it's only fairly recently, obviously, with the summer recess, although it's not been much of a break for me at UCL. So yeah, but there are some things that and they are mentioned in the document, that are recent. One of those is obviously well known, the general election. Labour has come in with their own plans, which might impact on this. In terms of devolution, there's already talk about the digital planning programme, the open referral network, which are already in place, or more joined up with these kind of bigger IT infrastructure plans. The Savvy network as well was already operational. There is talk of a larger AI network, and I have this document references AI. So there's already, and in the digital world, in IT, things move at pace, and increasingly so. So even discussions some months ago, that has changed. Labour, not mentioned here, are mentioning, rolling out broadband to 3,000 homes in rural areas, including businesses. So that will help with some of the issues that are in this document. And obviously also needs mentioned here, the local government digitalisation framework, which was launched on the 12th to 15th of July, which came after the last time the task group met. So those things have all happened after the document has been created, which are going to have impacts. I think we can certainly look to have a more streamlined version of this. But, one of the best place for that is, I think that could be just on a website for information. If things are moving fast, it might be ideal to keep that lightweight, but obviously using the references from the Task and Finish group. But I think we have to always keep in mind with digital and IT, things move rapidly. The government, looking at that, might invest money in a joined up, as per recommendation by the local government. They have suggested that they want to set up a centre for digital technology for local governments too. That's also not in here as well, mentioned since the election. So, yeah, I'm happy to work with Mark and Lorna. I'd be quite happy to push this through as it is. I think there's a lot of information, a lot of detail here that's not necessarily needed for the public, but I don't think that's a preventative. I think we can just take a streamlined version either onto the website or another format. I think this is great as it is.
Okay, so it seems that, well, we've got time for the extra meeting that you'd like, Councillor Cook, and to sort of tidy up some bits. And it sounds as if, as the Councillor just said, there's, change of government for a start and everything else that might need looking at. It's not like it's a rush, because it's not going to council until December. So it's all right, we won't be far off October soon, so it's got to be done, but yeah, it's not in 3 weeks' time. So you're happy to sort of...
I appreciate everybody's comments and everybody's considerations. I do hear what you're saying, Councillor Rathbone. Things do move incredibly fast. Unfortunately, for some of our digitally excluded residents, it moves too fast and they get even more frustrated, which is why we'd worked on a really simplified version that, could be available. So if somebody comes into the town hall or into any of our help centres, any of our social hubs, and, is just terribly distressed and confused, a really simplified version of where they can get help they need is what we were aiming for as well. So, we mustn't forget them. But I do think maybe looking towards putting together the customer charter, which I think we've got a very, very draft outline for, so that we can put that in it as well. I think the customer charter could probably do what I imagine to be, a good solution. Thank you.
Are you seconding Councillor Cook's motion? Councillor
Yes, in effect, I think it's wise to take a little more time. There are one or two places, incidentally, where extraneous words have crept into the text, There's one on page 195. And therefore, I think the idea of some kind of executive summary which is public facing with a much more detailed strategy for ourselves has a lot of attractions if it's practicable. So I would certainly support taking another look.
Okay. Well, I don't know if you're happy with that or not, Mark, but
it has to be right for us as an authority, and agree that, you know, for members of the public, it has to be an easy read version. You know, it's often lost. You know, while the detail is really important, you know, how it links in with, you know, that direction of travel where we've taken that strategy from. But it has to be simple to understand, you know, all the key aspects of that, and that, you know, I take the points from Councillor Cook in relation to that, because that's really important. You know, it's trying to do two things. You know, it's the digital element, but also it's the customer element, and where the two merge together. You know, I think that's where sometimes that detail expands more. But like I say, I'm happy to go with the recommendations that are being put forward.
Councillor Maynard, I've got you this time.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I just think that first thing to say is this huge lag on the feed. I'm watching the face of one person, and it's the previous speaker superimposed on them. So perhaps that's something we can look at. But on a more serious note, I think the point that Councillor Cook makes about this particular strategy could be applied to all strategies, and I know we've said this before. We presume, because we are interested in a particular subject, that members of the public will be interested in that subject as well. And as Councillor Cook alluded to, members of the public, generally speaking, are only interested if it affects them on that day, and that's why they're looking at the council website to look at that particular issue that they're interested in on that particular day. And that's not to denigrate members of the public in any way. It's just to say that there needs to be a simple version, I think, of every strategy we produce. And I do think sometimes, and again, this is again referencing the comments that Councillor Barnes made, sometimes, and I've been doing this for 25 years, and there's no doubt in my mind that sometimes, in order to make the highest quality document we possibly can, we unwittingly then make it perhaps too detailed. Whilst we want to make an aspirational document, what you don't see in a lot of these strategies is realism and pragmatism, because as Councillor Rathbone Ariel just said, what central government does is hugely important, and in terms of how we as a council operate in the longer term, clearly we must be aspirational, but clearly we've got to set that in the context. And in saying this, I'll declare that interest once again as a East Sussex County Councillor. But I think it's really important that within those documents that we are hugely aware of resilience for local authorities in regard to local government funding, because make no mistake, some of those things that we talk about in those documents are going to be absolutely impossible to achieve unless we've got proper local government funding. And again, without making a political comment, central government will have to decide where its priorities are, because unless there's something significant in the budget, we are going to see a very icy wind for authorities, whether they be upper tier or district and boroughs throughout the country. And we are in very choppy waters indeed, and I think that needs to be reflected in those documents. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Well, I think we've got the gist. You can sort of meeting out or get some dates to the members, and we know what we're doing. You'll be happy with that, Councillor Cook. So, all those in favour of what Councillor Cook said? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mark. Last item, agenda item 9. So the 9th of the 9th is gone. So 14th of the 10th looks reasonably busy. Again, medium-term financial plan, revenue budget, capital programme monitoring, review of progress against the recommendations of the Health and Wellbeing Task and Finish Group, Health and Wellbeing Board update report, active robber partnership strategy, savings assurance report. Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I won't bother with November.
medium-term financial plan is going to come to November, not October.
Yeah.
Is it? Right.
And I think also,
Draft budget.
Chair, if I may, the Health and Wellbeing Task and Finish Group and the Health and Wellbeing Board will also come to a future meeting.
Okey-dokey.
That's right, isn't it? Yes. Yeah.
Now, am I thinking review of, no, not that, Airbnbs, that's it, impact of Airbnb and second homes in Canberra, Rye and Winchelsea, that we were going to put that on an agenda? I thought I was supposed to send an email out and ask for people to be interested, but I thought if I got it on the agenda first, it would then know it's going to happen. So then once I've got the agenda, I can send the email out.
Yeah, we were going to look at who might be interested.
Well, I'll tell you what,
And
I'll
then
send
put it
an
on the
email
agenda.
out now.
Yeah,
And
okay.
as we've now October's looking a bit less busy, can we sort of agenda it for October for that meeting? And then we can see if we got room in the task and finish department, because we just extended one. Yeah. Cool. Oh.
Will we be bringing the digitalisation customer strategy back to the October overview and scrutiny for the scrutiny members to scrutinise it? Yes, thank you.
John?
There's mention here of the homelessness and rough sleeping strategy, but the Housing Task Force isn't really looking at that. The Housing Task Force is looking at a housing strategy, and I don't see that on the work programme. Am I missing something?
I think you're right, but you're right, it's the housing strategy that needs to come forward, so we'll talk to Joe about the timetable. Louise seems to know
I think that
something.
might be coming in April, I think.
Right, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, April 28th, new homelessness and rough sleeping strategy consultation results. No.
I think we'll check with Joe tomorrow exactly what the timetable is for the housing strategy, and it is it's on the forward plan, I think, or is it?
I think there's been an email sent today,
Oh,
actually.
right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Happy with that? Yeah. Cool. Right. That's it. Thank you for your forbearance this evening. Been a long one. Meeting finished at 21:05. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thanks, Anna.